I stood in the doorway of my parents' dining room, the heavy, polished oak door cool against my palm. The lively, booming chatter inside died instantly. It was like I had walked into a funeral instead of a celebratory family lunch. My younger brother, Elijah, was mid-laugh, his head thrown back in that arrogant way I knew so well, but the sound literally choked in his throat. He lowered his crystal glass of water so slowly that his hand trembled, water sloshing over the rim and staining the pristine white tablecloth. His jaw practically unhinged. Beside him, my mother's eyes darted up and down my body, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. Elijah finally stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He walked over to me, a forced, nervous chuckle escaping his lips, and actually poked my stomach with his index finger. He pressed hard, his eyes wide and frantic, desperately looking for the rolls of fat that used to be there. Did you get some surgeries done on yourself?" he stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of pale. I didn't flinch. I just looked down at him, a cold, calculated smirk forming on my face. Before I tell you how that single moment shattered my family's toxic illusion and turned my brother's perfect high society wedding into an absolute nightmare, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. But to truly understand why my simple smirk made my brother take a step back in pure fear, and why my parents looked like they had seen a ghost, we have to rewind. We have to go back 20 years to a house that always felt a little too small for me, yet somehow was entirely owned and operated by him. Growing up, I was the giant loser, and I don't mean that metaphorically or as a figure of speech. I was physically, undeniably, always the biggest kid in the room. By the time I hit kindergarten, I was towering over the other kids, carrying a weight that made me a prime, unavoidable target. While other children were running around the playground, figuring out who was fast, who was funny, and who was smart, my identity was already carved in stone by everyone around me. I was the fat kid. That was my entire personality to the outside world. My parents, Robert and Martha, didn't exactly make it easier to carry that burden. My dad was a stern, incredibly practical man who ran a local manufacturing business that he inherited. He valued outward appearances, firm handshakes, and sons who looked like they could carry on a strong masculine legacy. Then there was Elijah. Elijah was born exactly 1 year and 2 days after me, but looking at us, we couldn't have been more different if we came from different planets. If I was the heavy, dark shadow in the corner of the room, Elijah was the blazing sun. He was naturally athletic, possessed an effortless, magnetic charm, and had this bright, blinding smile that made adults hand him extra candy at the grocery store and made other kids follow him around like loyal puppies. He never had to try. The world just handed him everything on a silver platter, while I was left picking up the scraps, trying to shrink myself so I wouldn't take up too much space in a family that clearly only had room for one perfect son. Our house was a constant, suffocating reminder of where I stood in the hierarchy. The hallway walls were plastered with framed photographs of Elijah playing Little League baseball, Elijah holding a shiny spelling bee trophy, Elijah smiling on his shiny new bicycle. If you looked closely, you might find 1 or 2 pictures of me, usually shoved in the background, wearing baggy, unflattering clothes, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I remember a specific Tuesday evening when I was about 10 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen island, struggling with a complex math worksheet, quietly minding my own business. The kitchen smelled of roasting chicken and garlic. Dad walked in from work, loosening his tie. He immediately walked over to Elijah, who was loudly playing a handheld video game on the sofa, and aggressively ruffled his hair. "How's my star athlete doing?" Dad asked, his voice full of warmth. Elijah didn't even look up from his screen, just mumbled a "good, Dad." Dad then walked into the kitchen, poured himself a glass of iced tea, and finally noticed me. He stopped, leaned against the granite counter, and let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. It was a sound of profound disappointment that vibrated right through my chest. "Matthew," he said, shaking his head slowly, "look at your brother. He's active. He's sharp. You've been sitting on that stool for 2 hours. If you keep eating the way you do and just sitting around all day, you're gonna eat through your own college fund before you even graduate high school. You need to present yourself better. It reflects poorly on all of us. I shrank in my chair, wishing the floor would open up and swallow me whole. I didn't say anything. I just stared intensely at my yellow pencil, feeling the familiar, burning heat rise in my cheeks and prickle behind my eyes. My mother walked in right at that moment, wiping her hands on a floral dish towel. Did she jump to my defense? Did she tell my dad to stop being so harsh on a 10-year-old? No, she just clicked her tongue in agreement. "Leave him be, Robert," she said dismissively, not even making eye contact with me. "Not everyone is born with Elijah's genetics. Just make sure you wear that baggy blue sweater to Aunt Carol's house tomorrow, Matthew. It hides your stomach better. We don't want your aunt making comments again." They didn't see a young boy who was struggling, who needed help, guidance, or even just a little bit of unconditional encouragement. They saw a walking, breathing PR disaster for the family image. I learned very early on that in my house, love, attention, and respect were strictly conditional, and I simply didn't meet the physical requirements to earn them. So I retreated. I built a wall around myself. I found my ultimate sanctuary in the local library and in piles of thick books. Books didn't care if I was overweight. They didn't tell me to suck my gut in or wear baggy sweaters. Inside those pages, I could be an explorer, a detective, a hero. But the real nightmare, the one that truly broke me down, didn't start in our kitchen. It started a few years later, when Elijah and I entered the vicious jungle of high school together. High school is a battlefield for absolutely anyone, but for me it was a daily, scheduled execution. The minor teasing and side eyes from elementary school evolved into calculated, relentless, and highly public cruelty. And the absolute worst part of it all? The ringleader wasn't some random senior bully who didn't know me. It was the group of guys my own brother hung out with, led by a loud, arrogant guy named Luke. Luke was the starting quarterback of the varsity football team, and Elijah, naturally, was his right-hand man. I tried my hardest to stay completely invisible. I wore oversized dark hoodies even in the spring, kept my head down, stared at the linoleum floor in the hallways, and spent my entire lunch periods hiding out in the back corner of the library. But invisibility is a luxury you simply don't get when you're pushing 300 pounds. One terrible Tuesday, the library was closed for a staff meeting. I had no choice but to eat in the main cafeteria. I grabbed my food and walked tightly through the aisles. My tray gripped so hard in my hands that my knuckles were white. The room was a chaotic roar of teenage laughter, shouting, and clinking silverware. The air smelled of cheap pizza and sweat. As I walked past the center tables, the prime territory of the popular crowd, I felt a sudden, sharp, deliberate pain on my shin. Before my brain could even process what was happening, I was falling. The world tilted violently. My tray flew out of my hands. A heavy plastic plate, a carton of chocolate milk, and a bowl of hot macaroni and cheese crashed onto the floor, directly followed by my entire body weight. I hit the hard ground with a sickening thud, the breath instantly knocked out of my lungs. The entire cafeteria went dead, eerily silent for one agonizing, endless second. Then, the laughter erupted. It wasn't just a few giggles. It was a physical force, a roar of pure mockery pressing down on my chest. I looked up, my hands covered in sticky spilled milk and cheese. Standing right above me was Luke, casually pulling his foot back. He was grinning from ear to ear, looking around to make sure everyone saw his masterpiece. And sitting right next to him, laughing harder than anyone else, slapping the table in amusement, was my brother, Elijah. Elijah didn't stand up to help me. He didn't tell Luke to back off. He didn't even look guilty. He just sat there, performing for his friends, using my supreme humiliation as social currency to buy his way deeper into the cool crowd. I scrambled to my feet, my face burning so hot I thought I might actually pass out. I didn't even stay to clean up the mess. I just ran. I pushed blindly through the heavy double doors, sprinted down the empty hallway, and locked myself in a bathroom stall. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at my pathetic reflection in the mirror, shaking uncontrollably, fighting back hot tears. That evening, the tension at the dinner table was thick enough to cut with a knife. I pushed my mashed potatoes around my plate, my stomach in knots. I finally looked up at my mother, desperate for a lifeline. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a cracked whisper. "Luke tripped me today in the cafeteria." Everyone laughed. My food went everywhere. And Elijah was right there. He laughed too. Elijah dramatically rolled his eyes, aggressively stabbing a piece of chicken with his fork. "Oh my God. Stop being such a dramatic baby, Matt. It was a harmless joke. You're always so incredibly sensitive. Nobody actually cares." I snapped my head to look at my dad, waiting, hoping for some kind of fatherly intervention. My dad set his fork down, wiped his mouth slowly with a linen napkin, and looked at me with cold, hard eyes. "Matthew, your brother is right. You need to develop a thicker skin. Boys will be boys. If you didn't carry yourself like such a massive, walking target, maybe people wouldn't pick on you so much. You're the older brother. Act like a man, not a whining victim." My mother chimed in smoothly, pouring more red wine into her expensive glass. "Exactly, Robert. It's just sibling bonding. Elijah is just trying to toughen you up for the real world. Besides, maybe if you lost a few pounds, you could join them on the field instead of complaining about them to us." I just stared at them, my own flesh and blood. In that exact moment, the final string tying me to them snapped. I realized I was completely, utterly alone. I swallowed the hard lump of grief in my throat, nodded slowly with dead eyes, and excused myself. As I walked up the stairs, I locked my heart away. Since the physical world and my own family had rejected me, I threw every ounce of my energy into the only arena where I actually had control. Academics came effortlessly to me, while Elijah was out partying on weekends, barely scraping by with C-minuses and relying entirely on his golden boy charm to manipulate extensions out of female teachers. I was pulling perfect, straight A's. I dove headfirst into macroeconomics, European history, and advanced mathematics. It was my only armor, my only source of pride. But ironically, my success in the classroom created a brand new, highly toxic tension inside the house. My parents, who otherwise ignored my existence, suddenly found a use for me. They loved to weaponize my grades as a bragging right at neighborhood barbecues and country club dinners. "Oh yes, Matthew is our resident scholar," my dad would boast loudly to his business partners, holding his beer and clapping me firmly on a shoulder I didn't want him to touch. "He's got the serious brains. Elijah's got the killer charisma and the looks. Between the two of them, they'll run the damn world." Elijah absolutely despised it. He hated being compared to me in any category where he didn't automatically win first place. He couldn't stand the thought that the giant loser brother had something valuable that he didn't possess. And Elijah, beneath that loud golden boy exterior, was a deeply, fundamentally insecure person. It was midterms week during the spring of our junior year. I had spent 3 grueling weeks researching, drafting, and perfectly formatting a massive 25-page paper for my AP history class. It was worth 50% of my final semester grade. I had finally finished it on a Thursday night at 2 a.m. I printed it out, placed it lovingly in a neat, clear plastic folder, and left it dead center on my desk before collapsing into bed, exhausted but proud. When I woke up on Friday morning to pack my bag, the center of my desk was empty. A cold, terrifying panic seized my chest. I tore my room apart like a madman. I ripped the heavy blankets off the bed, emptied the entire contents of my backpack onto the floor, pulled out every single drawer in my desk, and threw papers everywhere. My breathing grew shallow and rapid. It was gone. I rushed to my ancient desktop computer to print another copy. The digital file, completely corrupted and permanently deleted from the hard drive. I ran downstairs, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. Elijah was sitting at the kitchen island, calmly eating a bowl of cereal, scrolling on his phone. He looked up at me, a slow, malicious, deeply satisfied smirk spreading across his face. "Looking for something, Matt?" he asked, his voice dripping with thick, fake innocence. My hands balled into tight fists. My nails dug into my palms. Where is it, Elijah? Where is my history paper? I don't know what you're talking about, man, he said, taking a slow, crunchy bite of his cereal. Maybe you got hungry in the middle of the night and ate it. I wanted to lunge across the counter and grab him by the collar. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, making my vision blur. But before I could move, Dad walked into the kitchen, hastily adjusting his silk tie. What's all this yelling about? I have a meeting with my lawyer in an hour. Keep it down. My history paper is gone, Dad. The big one. Elijah took it. He deleted the file too. I know he did it. Dad looked at me, completely exasperated, checking his gold watch. Matthew, do not be ridiculous. Why on earth would your brother want your boring history paper? You probably misplaced it in that pigsty you call a bedroom. This is exactly why you need to be more organized. Now stop maliciously blaming your brother for your own lazy incompetence and figure it out. I have to go. I got a flat 0 on that paper. My flawless grade plummeted. I spent the entire weekend locked inside my room, lying on my back, staring blankly at the ceiling. It wasn't until 5 long years later, when Elijah came home blackout drunk from a college frat party, that he slurred the ugly truth to me in the dark hallway. I burned it, he laughed, stumbling against the drywall, his breath reeking of cheap tequila. I took your stupid little paper out back to the fire pit and lit it on fire. You really thought you were better than me, didn't you, fatty? Listen to me. Nobody is better than me. That drunken confession was the final nail in the coffin. The morning after high school graduation, while my parents were downstairs planning a celebratory brunch for Elijah's mediocre diploma, I quietly packed 2 large suitcases. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I certainly didn't ask for a single dime of the college fund my parents had constantly dangled over my head like a carrot. I walked out the back door, got into my beat-up used car, and drove 3 states away to a sprawling city where nobody knew my name, nobody knew my golden brother, and absolutely nobody knew my miserable past. I enrolled in a massive state university. To pay my tuition and rent, I worked grueling full-time night shifts as a security guard at a warehouse. It was brutal. I survived on cheap instant ramen, black coffee, and severe sleep deprivation. My weight fluctuated, mostly staying high because of the stress and terrible diet, but for the first time in my entire life I was breathing clean air. No sideways, judging glances from my father. No snide, passive-aggressive comments from my mother about my portion sizes. I was exhausted, but I was free. During my sophomore year, the trajectory of my life changed forever. I met a guy named Joseph in an advanced business ethics seminar. Joseph was incredibly sharp, intensely ambitious, and surprisingly, he didn't judge me by my size. He just saw how fast my brain worked. We started studying together in the library. We quickly realized we both had a rare, natural knack for predictive market analysis and digital logistics. We didn't wait for graduation. We started a small, aggressive consulting firm right out of our cramped, messy dorm room. We grinded in the shadows for years. After college, while my brother Elijah was bouncing between entry-level corporate sales jobs, always getting quietly fired after 6 months because charm can't artificially inflate quarterly revenue quotas, Joseph and I were securing our first major corporate clients. By the time I turned 27, our firm wasn't just surviving. It was pulling in serious, multi-million-dollar revenue. My personal salary was a number that my father would have literally killed for in his prime. I bought my own luxury penthouse apartment, hired a tailor to custom-make my suits, even if they were still very large sizes, and meticulously built a highly successful life that was entirely, undeniably mine. I kept my toxic family at a severe, calculated distance. I gave them a polite, emotionless text on Thanksgiving, a brief, 5-minute phone call on Christmas Eve. I never once mentioned my business, my wealth, or my promotion to CEO of my own firm. To them, I was still just Matthew, the overweight, awkward guy who moved away and probably worked a mediocre, mid-level IT desk job. I liked it exactly that way. I absolutely refused to let their toxic, greedy hands touch my success. But then, late last year, my mother called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't say she missed me. She just demanded my immediate presence. Matthew, her voice crackled through the phone speaker. Sharp, commanding, and entitled. Your brother is making a huge, life-changing announcement this weekend. We are having a formal family lunch on Sunday at 1 p.m. I expect you to be there. Don't embarrass us by refusing to show up. I should have hung up the phone. I really, truly should have. But some stupid, buried, naive part of me, that little 10-year-old boy sitting at the kitchen table desperately hoping for a single nod of approval, thought that maybe, just maybe, enough time had passed. We were all adults now. Maybe they had grown up. Maybe things had changed. I booked a first-class flight, rented a modest car to keep a low profile, and walked into my parents' house on a crisp Sunday afternoon. The moment I stepped my foot into that living room, I knew I had made a catastrophic mistake. The living room looked exactly the same as the day I left. The same suffocating, heavy floral curtains blocking out the sun. The same uncomfortable antique sofa that nobody was actually allowed to sit on. Elijah was standing confidently by the grand brick fireplace, his arm wrapped tightly around a stunning, petite blonde woman in a designer dress. My parents were sitting opposite them, beaming at the couple like they were visiting royalty. Matthew, you finally made it, my mother said, not even bothering to get up from her plush armchair. She eyed my coat but offered absolutely no physical greeting. I nodded slowly, trying to force a polite smile onto my face. Good to see you, Mom. Dad. Elijah. Elijah grinned, flashing that same arrogant, highly practiced smile. Matt, glad you could waddle on over. We were starting to think you got stuck in the doorway. The tension in the room instantly spiked. The blonde woman beside him shifted uncomfortably, her smile faltering for a second. Elijah proudly held up her left hand. A massive, ostentatious diamond ring flashed blindingly under the crystal chandelier. Meet Sarah, he announced, puffing out his chest. We're officially engaged. Getting married next summer at the country club. Congratulations, I said, genuinely trying to push past his insult and be the bigger person. That's wonderful news, Elijah. Nice to meet you, Sarah. Sarah smiled politely, her eyes scanning my large frame. Nice to meet you too, Matthew. Elijah has told me so much about you. I could only imagine the horrific, exaggerated stories he had entertained her with. I sat down heavily in an armchair near the corner. So, I started trying to pivot to normal, polite conversation. How are things? I've been doing really well. Work has been incredibly busy, but... Elijah cut me off loudly, waving his hand in the air to dismiss my words. Let's be real for a second, Matt. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, staring directly, pointedly at my stomach. I just gotta ask, why are you still fat? The room went dead, terrifyingly silent. The air vanished straight out of my lungs. I felt a violent rush of heat to my face, instantly transporting me back to the cold linoleum of that high school cafeteria floor. Excuse me, I managed to say, my voice tight and low. I mean, seriously? Elijah chuckled, looking around at our parents for validation, treating me like a zoo animal. You live in a big, modern city now. You're a grown adult. If your life is truly so amazing and busy, shouldn't you have hit a treadmill by now? I just don't get how you can just let yourself go like that. It's honestly embarrassing to look at. I gripped the wooden armrests of the chair, my knuckles turning stark white. I looked directly at my dad, waiting, hoping for him to finally, just once, shut Elijah down. Instead, my dad took a slow sip of his expensive scotch, swirled the amber liquid in the glass, and nodded in agreement. Your brother has a very valid point, Matthew, my dad said casually, as if they were discussing the weather forecast. You're approaching 30 years old. You're severely overweight. You're not married. I worry you're never going to give us any grandchildren. Look at Elijah. He's settling down, marrying into a great family, building a real future. What exactly are you doing with your life? I was utterly stunned. The massive promotions I had achieved, the multimillion-dollar business I built entirely from scratch, the complete financial independence I secured. None of it existed to them. In their shallow eyes, I was nothing more than a walking, breathing measurement of body fat. "I like my life exactly the way it is," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed, boiling anger. "I run a successful firm. I have complete freedom. I make a great salary. I don't need to be married right this second to be happy. I am content." My mother scoffed loudly, a harsh, grating sound. She gave me a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Content? Oh please, Matthew, don't lie to yourself. What's the point of earning all that money if you don't have anyone to come home to? You're just going to end up a lonely, miserable old man in an empty apartment. It's pathetic, really." Just as the sting of my mother's words settled into my chest, the heavy oak front door swung open, and Samuel walked in without knocking. Samuel was an old buddy of Elijah's from high school. He was the kind of guy who used to pretend to be my friend in middle school just so he could come over, eat our snacks, and play my video games, only to turn around and ruthlessly mock me with Luke and Elijah the next day at school. Apparently, he was going to be one of the groomsmen for the big day. "Hey, Mr. and Mrs. C. Elijah, Sarah," Samuel boomed, walking into the living room with an annoying swagger. Then, his eyes landed on me sitting in the corner. He stopped dead in his tracks, looked me up and down with exaggerated shock, and let out a loud, piercing whistle. "Damn, Matt, you haven't missed a single meal since you left this town. Have you?" Elijah burst out laughing, slapping his knee. My dad chuckled, taking another sip of his scotch. I felt a cold, clammy sweat break out on the back of my neck. I was completely surrounded. This wasn't a family reunion. It was a coordinated, premeditated attack, and I was entirely unarmed in hostile territory. Elijah stood up, walked over, and stood over my chair, looking down at me with a fake, pitying expression that made my skin crawl. "Look, Matt, the wedding is in exactly 1 year. Sarah's family is very high society. Her dad is Christian Vance. He's the CEO of Vance Enterprises. We are talking serious, old money and a massive reputation here. I expect you to at least have a presentable +1 by the time my wedding rolls around. I absolutely do not want Christian's wealthy family thinking my older brother is some miserable, fat loner." "Yeah," my dad chimed in eagerly, leaning forward. "If you lost some significant weight, it would be much simpler for you to attract a decent partner. You need to look presentable for the wedding photos. You can't be ruining the aesthetic. It reflects terribly on the whole family. I want you to drop at least 40 pounds before the wedding," Elijah commanded, his tone completely serious. He wasn't asking, he was giving an order. "Consider it your wedding gift to me. Don't embarrass me on my big day." I sat there, frozen to the chair. The sheer audacity, the utter, breathtaking lack of respect. They were talking to me like I was a broken, ugly piece of furniture that needed to be reupholstered and hidden in the corner before important company came over. I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs. I wanted to pull up my bank accounts and show them that my net worth probably dwarfed Dad's failing manufacturing plant 10 times over. I wanted to tell them about the massive corporate contracts I was personally negotiating. But the words wouldn't leave my throat. The deep, ingrained trauma of 20 years had locked my jaw shut tight. I abruptly stood up, the chair legs screeching against the floor. "I need some air," I muttered, pushing aggressively past Samuel and walking straight out the sliding glass doors to the back patio. I stood in the cool evening air, gripping the wooden deck railing so hard my hands shook, breathing heavily. How could I have been so incredibly stupid to come back here? The sliding glass door clicked open behind me. I turned around, fully expecting to see my mother coming out to scold me for being rude to their guests. Instead, it was my Uncle Julian. Julian was Dad's younger brother. He always had a sleazy, untrustworthy vibe, constantly plotting shady schemes to get rich quick. But above all else, he absolutely loved to stir the pot and watch drama unfold. Julian leaned against the wooden railing next to me, casually pulling a silver lighter from his pocket and lighting a cigarette. He took a long, deep drag and blew the thick smoke out into the night air. Rough crowd in there tonight. Huh, kid? They haven't changed a single bit, I said bitterly, staring out into the dark yard. Julian chuckled. A dry, raspy, knowing sound. You actually think they just care about your waistline because of some stupid wedding photos? Oh, Matthew, you really are out of the loop, aren't you? I frowned, turning to look at him, my heart rate picking up. What the hell do you mean? Julian flicked his glowing ashes into my mother's prized rose bushes. Your dad's manufacturing business is completely tanking, Matt. He's up to his eyeballs in bad debt. Elijah's wedding to Sarah isn't just a romance. It's basically a desperate financial lifeline. Christian Vance is a massive whale in the industry. If Elijah officially marries in, your dad is praying that Christian will throw a massive, exclusive supply contract his way and save the factory from total bankruptcy. I stared at him, my stomach dropping into my shoes. Okay, that makes sense for Elijah. But what does any of that have to do with me losing weight? Julian smirked, shaking his head at my innocence. Christian has an older sister, Brenda. She's 45 years old. Recently went through a brutally messy divorce. And from what I hear, she is an absolute nightmare of a human being. Nobody in their social circle wants to be anywhere near her. Christian is desperate to get her settled down and out of his hair so she stops causing scandals. Your parents caught wind of this little problem. My blood ran ice cold. I could feel the horrifying realization hitting me like a physical, blunt force blow to the chest. They want to clean you up? Julian continued, his voice dripping with dark amusement. They figure if you aggressively lose the weight, put on a nice, expensive suit, and learn how to smile, you'd be a decent enough, pliable catch. They want to forcefully set you up with Brenda Vance. If both of Robert's sons marry into the Vance family, your dad's business is permanently, unquestionably secured. You aren't just a guest at this wedding, Matthew. You're part of the business transaction. You're the bargaining chip. I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry. The betrayal was so deep, so profoundly disgusting. It actually made me dizzy. My own parents. They didn't care about my physical health. They didn't care about my mental happiness. They literally wanted to pimp me out to an older, toxic woman just to save a failing factory that my dad had run into the ground with his own incompetence. And they were doing all of this while making sure their golden boy, Elijah, got his picture-perfect fairy tale ending. I thought you should know the truth, Julian said, patting my shoulder patronizingly before dropping his cigarette, stepping on it and turning to walk back inside. Good luck with the diet, kid. I stood completely alone in the dark for a very long time. The night air was freezing, biting through my thin shirt, but I didn't feel it. I felt a fire ignite deep inside my chest, burning hotter, brighter, and more violently than anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the agonizing, self-pitying, quiet pain of my teenage years. It was pure, unadulterated, blinding rage. I didn't go back into the living room. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked around the dark side of the house, got into my rental car, slammed the door, and drove straight to the airport, breaking the speed limit the entire way. I changed my flight at the counter and left that exact same night. As I sat in my first-class seat on the red-eye flight, looking out the small window at the city lights fading into the blackness below, I made a silent, unbreakable vow. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to lose the weight. I was going to look absolutely spectacular for Elijah's wedding. But I wasn't doing it to play the role of the obedient, pathetic, desperate son in their twisted, sickening business transaction. I was going to do it so that when I finally dropped the hammer and destroyed their entire world, they wouldn't be able to look away. The very moment the plane landed, before I even walked out of the terminal, I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Joseph about work. I called Gabriel. Gabriel was an ex-Marine turned elite, private personal trainer. I had met him a year ago at a high-end charity gala my firm sponsored, but I had always been too deeply intimidated and ashamed of my body to actually hire him. The phone rang 3 times before his deep voice answered. Gabriel, I said, my voice eerily steady and ice-cold. "It's Matthew. I need your help. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how much it physically hurts. I have exactly 1 year to build a completely new body." The next 12 months were an absolute crucible. I didn't just change my daily habits. I went to all-out war with my own biology. Gabriel didn't mess around, and he didn't coddle me. The very first day I walked into his private, underground gym, he handed me a heavy, leather medicine ball, pointed to a reinforced concrete wall, and told me to throw it until I literally couldn't lift my arms above my head. I threw up in a trash can after 20 minutes. I lay flat on my back on the black rubber mats, gasping violently for air, staring up at the harsh fluorescent lights, every muscle screaming at me to quit. Gabriel stood directly over me, his massive arms crossed over his chest. "You can walk out that door right now, Matthew," he said, his voice void of any pity. "Go back to your comfortable apartment. Go back to being the guy everyone talks down to and laughs at. Or you can get the hell up, pick up that ball, and take control of your damn life." I closed my eyes tightly. In the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw Elijah's arrogant smirk. I heard my mother's piercing voice. "What's the point of earning money if you don't have anyone to come home to?" I heard Julian's raspy, mocking laugh telling me I was nothing but a pawn in a dirty business deal. My jaw clamped shut. I rolled over, forced myself onto my shaking knees, grabbed the rough leather of the medicine ball, and stood up. I essentially lived at the gym and the office. I threw out every single piece of junk food, sugar, and processed garbage in my penthouse. My diet consisted entirely of lean protein, steamed greens, and exactly weighed portions of complex carbs. The physical hunger during the first month was maddening. Kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling. But every single time my stomach growled, I fed it my anger. I pushed heavy metal sleds stacked with iron plates across the turf until my legs felt like they were literally on fire. I ran on the incline treadmill until my lungs burned and tasted like blood. Gabriel was relentless, but he didn't just train my body. He broke down and rebuilt my mind. He systematically destroyed the mental barriers of the fat kid, who subconsciously felt he deserved to be bullied, and replaced him with a warrior. By month 3, the numbers on the scale started moving rapidly downwards. By month 6, my old, expensive suits were practically falling off my body. I had to buy cheap, temporary outfits just to function in the office. But the real, shocking transformation wasn't just the fat melting away. It was the dense muscle building underneath. The broad, naturally wide shoulders I always had were no longer hidden under soft layers of tissue. My posture completely changed. I stopped slouching and hunching my shoulders to make myself look smaller. I stood tall. When I walked into a corporate boardroom, I didn't look like a nervous, overweight IT guy anymore. I looked imposing. I looked like a boss. People out in the world started treating me vastly differently. The baristas at my local coffee shop smiled wider and lingered when handing me my cup. Complete strangers held doors open for me. Business rivals in intense negotiations suddenly seemed physically intimidated by my presence across the table. It was a dark, vindicating, and slightly depressing realization of how incredibly superficial the world truly is. But I didn't care about the world. I only cared about the date circled in dark red marker on my calendar. Elijah's final wedding planning lunch. While my physical body was violently transforming in Gabriel's gym, my business mind was executing a brilliant masterstroke in the financial shadows. Joseph and I had been quietly tracking a major corporate acquisition target for months. Ironically, the target was heavily tied into the fragile supply chain of Vance Enterprises, the very empire owned by Christian Vance. The same Christian Vance whose daughter was marrying my brother. Through deep digging, Joseph discovered that Christian's company was expanding way too fast. They had secretly over-leveraged themselves on a massive, highly risky international real estate deal that went completely sour. They were bleeding cash fast, facing a severe, imminent liquidity crisis that hadn't hit the public news outlets yet. They desperately needed a massive injection of capital within 30 days to avoid a disastrous stock plummet and potential bankruptcy. Joseph and I saw the perfect opening. We aggressively pooled our firm's capital, brought in two silent billionaire partners we trusted, and structured a massive, hostile-turned-friendly investment buyout. But I made one strict, non-negotiable condition with our team of elite corporate lawyers. I want the primary investor's name heavily shielded behind an ironclad LLC. I told my lead attorney, sitting comfortably in my massive glass-walled office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. Christian Vance deals exclusively with the LLC. He reports to the LLC. He does not know my real name or see my face until the ink is completely dry, the funds are transferred, and I say so. I want total, unquestionable anonymity. My lawyer, a sharp, ruthless guy who knew much better than to ask personal questions when millions were on the line, simply nodded. Done. The paperwork will be completely airtight. He won't know what hit him. Exactly 2 weeks before Elijah's wedding, the massive deal closed. Our LLC injected enough capital into Vance Enterprises to save them from total ruin. In exchange, I became the majority stakeholder and the primary shot caller in their most profitable subsidiary. I held the leash. Christian Vance, the incredibly powerful man my father was desperate to impress, the man my brother was marrying into to elevate his pathetic social status, now practically worked for me. And he had absolutely no idea. The chess pieces were perfectly set on the board. Checkmate was imminent. With only 10 days left until I had to fly back for the final family wedding lunch, I went to a high-end, exclusive bespoke tailor in the financial district. I didn't want off-the-rack. I wanted armor. The tailor meticulously measured my new dimensions. I had lost over 90 pounds of pure fat and packed on thick, solid muscle. My waist was trim, my chest was broad. I chose a deep, rich navy blue suit, the fabric imported and sharp enough to cut glass. I paired it with a crisp white shirt, leaving the top 2 buttons undone. Confident, relaxed, lethal. Next, I walked into a premium celebrity salon. I had worn my dark brown hair in a messy, unstructured mop my entire life to hide my round face. I sat in the leather chair and told the master stylist to do whatever worked best for my jawline. A sharp jawline I didn't even know I possessed until Gabriel helped me carve it out of stone. The stylist gave me a sharp, incredibly modern fade, and suggested lightening the top to a stylish, sun-kissed blonde to perfectly complement my skin tone. I agreed without hesitation. When I finally looked in the full-length mirror at the end of the day, fully dressed in my tailored suit with my new hair, I honestly didn't recognize the man staring back at me. He looked wealthy. He looked powerful. He looked incredibly dangerous. I smiled, my reflection perfectly mirroring the cold, dark satisfaction in my eyes. The giant loser was dead and buried. I calmly packed my expensive leather duffel bag. I didn't tell my parents I was coming until the very night before my flight. I simply sent a brief text to my mother. I'll be at the lunch tomorrow at 1 p.m. Her reply was instant and predictable. Make sure you wear something dark and loose, Matthew. Try your best to look presentable. Sarah's parents might stop by. I locked my phone, tossed it into my bag, and headed to the airport. The storm was finally coming, and I was bringing the thunder. I parked my sleek black rental sedan at the end of the long driveway. I sat behind the leather steering wheel for a long moment, simply staring through the windshield at the familiar brick facade of my childhood home. For 20 years, this house had been my personal prison. It was the place where my self-worth had been systematically dismantled brick by brick. My palms were completely dry. My heart rate was a steady, calm rhythm. The terrified, overweight kid who used to dread walking through that front door was gone. I stepped out of the car, feeling the perfect, snug fit of my tailored navy blue suit across my shoulders. I adjusted my cuffs, took a deep breath of the crisp afternoon air, and walked up the concrete path. I didn't bother using my old key. I pressed the brass doorbell. I could hear the loud, obnoxious laughter of my brother echoing from the dining room inside. The heavy wooden door swung open. My mother stood there, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She was wearing a beige cashmere sweater, her hair perfectly stiff with hairspray. She looked right at me, her eyes sweeping over my face, my blonde hair, the sharp cut of my suit. She actually started to offer a polite, welcoming smile, the kind she reserved for wealthy neighbors or delivery drivers she wanted to impress. She didn't recognize her own son. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone entirely pleasant. I looked down at her, maintaining absolute, unwavering eye contact. "Hello, Mom. I told you I'd be here by 1 o'clock. The sparkling water slipped right through her fingers. The heavy crystal glass shattered violently against the hardwood floor of the foyer, sending water and sharp shards flying across the entryway. Her hands flew up to her mouth. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates, her pupils dilating in pure, unadulterated shock. All the color instantly drained from her perfectly made-up face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. She tried to speak, but only a raspy, breathless sound came out of her throat. Hearing the loud crash, the chatter in the dining room abruptly stopped. Heavy footsteps approached the hallway. My dad rounded the corner, his face red with annoyance. "Martha, what in the world did you just drop?" His voice cut off instantly. He stopped dead in his tracks, nearly tripping over the edge of the hallway rug. His mouth fell open. He looked at me, then looked at the broken glass, then back at me. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost manifest in his front hallway. I stepped carefully over the broken glass, walking past my paralyzed mother, and made my way straight into the dining room. The scene inside was perfectly set for a disaster. The long mahogany table was covered in expensive catering menus and fabric swatches. Sitting at the table was Elijah, wearing a tight polo shirt that clung to his arms, and his fiancée, Sarah. Sitting nervously next to them was a man holding a clipboard, clearly David, their overpriced wedding planner. Elijah was mid-laugh from whatever joke he had just told, his head thrown back. But as I walked fully into the natural light of the room, the sound literally choked in his throat. He lowered his glass of water so slowly that his hand trembled visibly. Water sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth in front of him. His jaw practically unhinged. I stood at the head of the table, resting one hand casually in my pocket. "Sorry I'm a minute late," I said, my voice deep, calm, and completely devoid of emotion. Traffic off the highway was brutal. Elijah finally stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He walked slowly around the table, approaching me like I was an active bomb about to detonate. A forced, high-pitched, incredibly nervous chuckle escaped his lips. He reached out a shaking hand and actually poked my flat stomach with his index finger. He pressed hard, his eyes wide and frantic, desperately searching for the soft rolls of fat that used to define my entire existence. He pulled his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. Did you get some surgeries done on yourself?" he stammered, his face turning a sickly, pale shade of green. "There is absolutely no way you look this good by yourself. You got liposuction. You had to." I didn't flinch. I didn't get defensive. I just looked down at him, my eyes locking onto his terrified gaze, and a cold, calculated smirk formed on my face. "No surgery, Elijah. Just a lot of hard work, strict discipline, and self-love. Something you might want to try sometime instead of coasting on Daddy's credit cards." The silence in the dining room was deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the thick Persian rug. My mother finally hurried into the room, carefully avoiding looking at me directly. She rushed to my father's side, clutching his arm. They were all staring at me as if an alien had just crash-landed in their perfectly curated suburban life. I could see the exact moment the shock in Elijah's eyes morphed into something much darker and uglier. Pure, unhinged jealousy. For his entire life, he had been the handsome one, the golden boy, the standard of beauty in our family. And now, standing right in front of him, I didn't just look better than him. I looked like I owned the entire building. My mother, recovering from her initial paralysis, instantly reverted to her default setting, manipulation and criticism. She couldn't handle the power dynamic shifting so drastically. She had to find a flaw. She desperately needed to drag me back down to my designated place at the bottom of the family food chain. She stepped forward, crossing her arms defensively. "Well," she started, her voice tight and high-pitched, "you certainly lost weight. I suppose that's good for your health. But Matthew, what on earth were you thinking with that hair?" I raised an eyebrow, running a hand through my perfectly styled blonde fade. "My hair? It's just a new color, Mom. My stylist suggested it. It fits my skin tone better." "It is entirely inappropriate," my dad barked, finding his courage now that my mother had opened the door for an attack. He pointed a thick, accusatory finger at my head. "You look completely ridiculous. You look like you're going through some pathetic midlife crisis and you aren't even 30 yet. You are making a fool of yourself. We have important high society guests coming to this wedding. You are going to look entirely out of place." Elijah jumped right in, eager to regain the upper hand. He crossed his arms over his chest, trying to make himself look bigger. "Exactly, Matt. Seriously, blonde? Are you actively trying to sabotage my wedding? Because it feels like you're trying to steal the spotlight on my big day. With your drastic weight loss, people are already going to be staring at you and whispering. Do you really need to steal my hair color too? I've always been the blonde one in this family. Go back to brunette." Today, I let out a low, genuine laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the laugh of a man who suddenly realized how incredibly small and pathetic his bullies truly were. "Are you seriously telling me that you own a color on the color wheel, Elijah? You think I dyed my hair to upstage you? You really think the entire universe revolves around your fragile ego?" David, the wedding planner, shifted extremely uncomfortably in his seat, desperately pretending to look at his clipboard. Sarah was staring at her lap, her face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. "Do not speak to your brother that way," my mother snapped, stepping closer to me. "He is under a lot of stress. And quite frankly, Matthew, you are being incredibly selfish. We specifically asked you to clean up so you could make a good impression. Do you remember the plan we discussed? About Brenda Vance?" I looked at her, my expression turning to stone. "Oh, you mean the 45-year-old woman you planned to pimp me out to in order to save Dad's failing factory? That Brenda." My dad's face turned a violent shade of purple. He glanced nervously at Sarah, terrified she would tell her father about their desperate scheme. "Keep your voice down, Matthew. You have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You know nothing about business. Brenda is a lovely woman. Her divorce was just finalized last month. Her lawyer took half of her ex-husband's assets. She is incredibly wealthy and she is ready to settle down with a stable guy. Now that you look halfway decent, you actually have a shot with her. You should be thanking us on your hands and knees for setting this up. It's the only promotion in social status you'll ever get." I stared at them. They hadn't changed. The weight loss hadn't earned their respect. The tailored suit hadn't earned their love. To them, I was still just a useless object. The only difference was that before, I was an ugly object they wanted to hide in the closet. Now, I was a shiny object they wanted to sell to the highest bidder to pay off their debts. The sickness in this family was terminal. There was no cure. "I'm not marrying Brenda Vance," I said slowly, enunciating every single syllable so there could be no misunderstanding. "And I'm not dyeing my hair. I am not your bargaining chip, Dad. And I am not your punching bag anymore, Elijah." Before my father could erupt into a screaming match, the heavy brass doorbell rang again. The sound echoed sharply through the tense house. My mother gasped, immediately smoothing down her sweater. "Oh my goodness, that must be Christian. He said he was dropping by to review the final catering deposits." She shot me a venomous, panicked glare. "Matthew, do not say a single word. Do not embarrass us in front of this man. Our entire family's future depends on him." My dad aggressively straightened his tie, plastered a massive, incredibly fake smile onto his face, and practically sprinted to the front foyer. I stood exactly where I was, my hands relaxed at my sides. I could hear the heavy wooden door open, followed immediately by my father's obsequious, groveling voice. "Christian, Mr. Vance, so incredibly wonderful of you to stop by our humble home." My dad practically purred. "Please come right in. We were just going over the final floral arrangements for the kids' big day. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed in the hallway. Christian Vance walked into the dining room. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, wearing a charcoal gray bespoke suit that screamed old money and absolute authority. He exuded the kind of raw power that makes everyone else in the room subconsciously hold their breath. He was the CEO of Vance Enterprises, the billionaire titan my father was desperately trying to leech off of. Elijah instantly stood up straighter, putting on his best golden boy smile. "Mr. Vance, great to see you again, sir. Thank you so much for taking the time." Christian offered a brief, polite nod to Elijah and Sarah. "Elijah, Sarah, sweetheart, you look lovely." He then turned his attention to my parents. "Robert, Martha, I only have a few minutes. My legal team is finalizing some massive restructuring paperwork back at the office, and I need to be on a conference call in 20 minutes. Of course, completely understand," my dad stammered, rubbing his hands together nervously. "We have the catering contracts right here. And, Christian, I was hoping maybe after the wedding we could set up a quick lunch? Discuss that supply chain contract for my factory? We have some incredibly competitive rates." Christian held up a single hand, stopping my father mid-sentence. His eyes had just swept past David the wedding planner and landed squarely on me standing at the head of the table. Christian Vance froze. His entire demeanor shifted in a fraction of a second. The polite, distant corporate mask vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, profound shock. He blinked twice, as if trying to verify that his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. He took a slow step forward, completely ignoring my father who was still hovering awkwardly next to him. Christian walked directly toward me, his eyes locked onto mine. A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the room once again. My mother looked back and forth between Christian and me, genuine panic setting in. "Christian?" she asked tentatively. "Is everything all right? This is just my older son, Matthew. Please excuse his appearance, he's—" "Matthew?" Christian interrupted, his voice hushed and reverent. He stopped 3 feet away from me. He didn't look at my hair. He didn't look at my waistline. He looked at me with deep, undeniable respect. Because 3 days ago, via a highly secure, encrypted video conference call to finalize the massive corporate buyout, Christian Vance and I had spoken face to face. I had revealed my identity to him as the sole owner of the LLC that had just saved his entire legacy from total ruin. He knew exactly who I was. He knew exactly how much power I held over his family's future. Christian immediately extended his right hand, dipping his head in a slight, incredibly respectful bow. A bow of a subordinate to his boss. "Mr. C," Christian said clearly, his voice booming in the quiet room. "What an absolute, unexpected honor. I had absolutely no idea you were Robert's son. You kept your personal connections incredibly quiet during the acquisition negotiations. If I had known, I would have hosted you at my own estate." I reached out and shook his hand firmly. "Good to see you, Christian. I prefer to keep business and family completely separate. It prevents complications." My father let out a strange, strangled squeak. "Acquisition? Negotiations? Christian, what are you talking about? Matthew is just an IT guy. He doesn't know anything about our level of business." Christian slowly turned his head to look at my father. He looked at Robert like he was a particularly slow, annoying insect. "Robert, are you completely out of your mind? Your son isn't an IT guy. Matthew here is the majority stakeholder and the sole owner of the private equity firm that just bought out the primary subsidiary of Vance Enterprises. He single-handedly saved my entire company from bankruptcy last week. He is quite literally my boss. His firm's net worth is staggering." The room did not just go silent. The room died. The color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he was going to have a massive heart attack right there on the Persian rug. He gripped the edge of the dining table to keep his knees from buckling. My mother let out a tiny, pathetic gasp, covering her mouth with both hands, her eyes rolling wildly in her head. Elijah looked like he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his arrogant golden boy facade completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. He looked from me to Christian Vance and back to me. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The giant loser brother he had relentlessly bullied, the brother he had demanded lose weight just to look presentable in the background of his wedding photos, was currently holding the absolute financial leash of the billionaire family he was desperately trying to marry into. I looked at my family, taking in their utter, devastating humiliation. I had taken their entire world, flipped it upside down, and smashed it on the floor. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Christian Vance, sensing the intensely toxic and volatile atmosphere in the room, quickly cleared his throat. He was a ruthless businessman, but he wasn't stupid. He realized he had just walked into a massive family minefield. I can see this as a private family matter, Christian said smoothly, taking a deliberate step back toward the hallway. Mr. C, I will have my legal team send over the finalized structural documents to your office by Monday morning. Robert, we can discuss the catering bills at a later date. Good afternoon. Without waiting for a response, Christian turned on his heel and walked out the front door, the heavy wood clicking shut behind him with a profound sense of finality. I turned my attention back to my family. They were completely frozen in place, a grotesque tableau of shock, horror, and impending doom. My father was still gripping the edge of the mahogany table, breathing heavily through his nose. My mother was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. Elijah looked like a deflated balloon, his shoulders slumped, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an escape route. I walked over to the table, picked up a clean crystal glass, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water from a fresh bottle. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold water felt incredible against my dry throat. I set the glass down. It made a sharp, echoing clack against the wood. You know, I started, my voice dangerously soft, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. I actually flew all the way out here today hoping that maybe, just maybe, you had changed. I put myself through absolute hell for a year. I lost 90 pounds. I built an empire. But the second I walked through that door, you proved exactly who you are. You are the exact same small, petty, pathetic bullies you were 20 years ago. My father finally found his voice. It was weak, trembling, and entirely stripped of its usual arrogant authority. Matthew, son, I had absolutely no idea. Why didn't you tell us you were doing so well? We could have partnered up. My factory, it's struggling, and you... Stop right there, I snapped, raising a hand. Do not ever call me son again, and do not ever ask me for a dime. You want to talk about your factory, Robert? I know exactly how deep in debt you are. I know you were banking on this wedding to beg Christian Vance for a supply contract to save your miserable legacy. And I know your brilliant backup plan was to pimp me out to his unstable, divorced sister just to secure the deal. My dad visibly flinched, taking a step backward. He looked down at his expensive leather shoes, unable to meet my eyes. You have no right to judge my hair, or my clothes, or my life. I continued, stepping closer to him, using my height and my new physical presence to tower over him. You are a terrible businessman who ran his inheritance into the ground, and you are a worse father. Look at yourself. You're bald, you're broke, and you're begging for a promotion in social rank from a man who works for me. You are nothing. I turned my head slowly to look at my mother. She shrank back against the wall, tears welling up in her eyes, smearing her expensive mascara. And you, Mom, I said, my voice dripping with cold disgust. You spent my entire life criticizing every single bite of food I put into my mouth. You let your favorite son trip me in the cafeteria, and you told me it was sibling bonding. You care more about what the neighbors think than your own child's mental health. I really hate how loose the skin is around your eyes. I hate how your lips droop on one side when you put on that fake, high society smile for your country club friends. It's physically disgusting to me. You are a hollow, empty woman." She let out a loud sob, covering her face with her hands, but I felt absolutely zero pity for her. I turned my attention to the main event. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing directly in front of Elijah. He refused to look up at me. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, his jaw clenched tight. "Elijah," I whispered, "look at me." He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red and watery. "Don't you ever, in your entire miserable life, talk down to me again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but laced with pure venom. "You peaked in high school, Elijah. You have zero actual skills. You bounce from job to job because you think your smile can substitute for hard work. You rely entirely on your college fund and daddy's dwindling bank account. Between the two of us, I have always been the smarter, better sibling. And now I'm the better-looking one, too. Look at yourself. Without daddy's money, what are you? You're a joke. Just look at those chubby little arms of yours. You better hit the treadmill before the wedding, little brother." Elijah's face flushed a deep, violent crimson with absolute shame. He looked like he was about to burst into tears or throw a punch, but he was too terrified to do either. I reached out, grabbed my glass of water, downed the rest of it in one single gulp, and slammed the glass back onto the table. "Enjoy the wedding," I said to the silent room. "Don't bother saving me a seat. I wouldn't be caught dead associating with any of you." I turned around, adjusted my suit jacket, and walked out of the house. I didn't look back once. The moment I stepped off the front porch and into the cool afternoon air, a massive, crushing weight completely lifted off my chest. It felt like I had been carrying a boulder on my back for 29 years, and I had finally just dropped it on their feet. I walked down the driveway, the gravel crunching satisfyingly beneath my polished dress shoes. I unlocked my rental car, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. As I pulled out of the neighborhood, leaving the manicured lawns and the suffocating memories behind in the rearview mirror, my phone immediately started to vibrate violently in the center console. I glanced down. The screen lit up with an incoming call from Dad. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it rang again. This time it was Mom. Then Elijah. I merged onto the highway, heading straight for the international airport. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and instructed it to play the voicemails out loud. I wanted to hear the exact sound of their desperation. The first voicemail was from my father. The arrogant, booming voice he used to lecture me about my weight was completely gone. He sounded breathless, frantic, and entirely broken. Matthew, please pick up the phone." My dad's voice pleaded through the car speakers. "Son, we need to talk about this. You can't just drop a bomb like that and walk out. You have to understand the pressure I'm under. The factory is going under. We are going to lose the house. If you really own Vance Enterprises, you have the power to approve that supply contract. You can save the family. I am begging you, Matthew. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. Please call me back so we can discuss a proper salary and a position for you on the board." I laughed out loud. The sheer delusion. He still thought he could negotiate with me. He still thought he had something to offer. I deleted the voicemail permanently. The next message was from my mother. It was a chaotic mess of loud sobbing and vicious guilt-tripping. "How could you do this to us, Matthew?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical. "In front of Christian Vance. In front of the wedding planner. You deliberately humiliated your brother on the most important week of his life. You are an evil, vindictive child. You need to turn your car around right now and come back here and apologize to Elijah. If you don't show up to this wedding, Sarah's family is going to ask questions. It will ruin our reputation. You owe us, Matthew. We raised you." I deleted that one too. I didn't owe them a damn thing. They hadn't raised me. I had survived them. The text messages started flooding in next. A rapid-fire barrage from Elijah. Matt, please talk to me. I'm sorry about the jokes. Okay? I didn't mean it. Sarah is freaking out. She thinks her dad is going to cancel the wedding because of you. Don't ruin my life just because you're mad about some high school crap. Please call Mr. Vance and tell him everything is fine with our family. Matthew, answer me. I pulled the car into the airport rental return lot. I parked the car, grabbed my leather duffel bag from the passenger seat, and took my phone in my hand. I opened the contact settings. I clicked on Robert. Block caller. I clicked on Martha. Block caller. I clicked on Elijah. Block caller. With 3 simple taps on a glass screen, I completely severed the cord. I permanently excised the cancer from my life. I walked into the busy airport terminal, the bright fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished floors. The air smelled of expensive coffee and jet fuel. It smelled like absolute freedom. I walked up to the airline counter. The ticketing agent smiled at me. How can I help you today, sir? I need to change my flight, I said, handing over my passport. I was scheduled to fly back to New York tonight, but I think I want to take a detour. What's the earliest first-class flight you have out of here to somewhere tropical? Hawaii, the Maldives, anywhere with a beach and no cell service. The agent tapped on her keyboard, raising an eyebrow. I have a direct flight to Maui leaving in exactly 2 hours. 1 first-class seat left. I'll take it, I smiled. I wasn't going to go home and sit in my apartment. I had just won the biggest war of my life. It was time to collect the spoils. I was going to treat myself to the vacation I so deeply deserved. The giant loser was going to Hawaii, and the golden boy was going to stay behind and deal with the burning wreckage of his own arrogant actions. The week of Elijah's highly anticipated, high society wedding arrived. While my toxic family was undoubtedly running around in a blind, terrified panic back in my gloomy hometown, desperately trying to hold the crumbling pieces of their fake image together, I was sitting on a private balcony in Maui, Hawaii. I had booked the most exclusive, ridiculously expensive oceanfront suite at a 5-star luxury resort. The kind of place where the staff remembers your name after the first day and hands you a chilled, eucalyptus-scented towel every time you walk off the pristine white sand beach. The contrast between my current reality and the miserable, suffocating funeral-like atmosphere I had left behind in my parents' dining room was almost comical. Instead of squeezing into an uncomfortable rented tuxedo and forcing a fake smile for hundreds of snobby country club guests who didn't care about me, I was wearing loose linen pants and a light button-down shirt. Instead of listening to my mother criticize the catering options and complain about my posture, I was listening to the rhythmic, soothing crash of the Pacific Ocean waves against the volcanic rocks below my balcony. I spent the entire week doing absolutely whatever brought me peace. There was zero drama. There was zero pressure. It was pure, unadulterated enjoyment and deep, necessary self-care. On Wednesday, I treated myself to a 4-hour session at the resort's world-renowned spa. I lay on a heated massage table while a professional worked out the deep, lingering knots of tension in my shoulders that I had carried since high school. On Thursday, I chartered a small private yacht and spent the afternoon snorkeling in crystal-clear water, surrounded by vibrant sea turtles and schools of tropical fish. I didn't look at a single spreadsheet. I didn't check a single business email. I completely disconnected from the noise of the world. Every morning, I woke up early, watched the breathtaking sunrise paint the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange, and went for a long, grueling run along the beach. It wasn't the angry, punishing, desperate running I had done back in Gabriel's underground gym a year ago. That running was fueled by dark rage and a desperate need for revenge. This running was different. This running was a celebration. I felt the powerful muscles in my legs working effortlessly. I felt the deep, clean capacity of my lungs. I was running simply because I could, because my body belonged to me now, and I was proud of what I had built. On Saturday afternoon, the exact scheduled date and time of Elijah and Sarah's massive wedding ceremony, I was sitting at a private table at the resort's open-air restaurant. I ordered an incredibly expensive, perfectly seared prime rib steak, a side of garlic asparagus, and a glass of the finest aged red wine they had in the cellar. I sat back in my plush chair, taking a slow sip of the rich wine. I looked out at the vast, endless horizon of the ocean. A light, warm breeze ruffled my blonde hair. I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. I didn't feel any sadness about missing my only brother's wedding. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. I raised my wine glass toward the horizon in a silent, solitary toast to myself. I had survived the fire, and I had forged myself into iron. Just as my steak arrived, perfectly cooked and smelling absolutely divine, my phone buzzed softly on the table. I had kept my parents and Elijah strictly blocked, but I hadn't changed my phone number entirely. I glanced down at the screen. It was a text message from Carter. Carter was a distant cousin on my dad's side of the family. He was a flamboyant, highly energetic guy who worked as a real estate agent. More importantly, Carter was the undisputed king of family gossip. If a secret existed in our bloodline, Carter knew about it, and he loved to broadcast it. I picked up the phone and opened the message. It was a very long, highly detailed text, accompanied by a candid, blurry photo taken from the back row of a church. I took a bite of my steak, chewed slowly, and began to read. The details of the disaster unfolding thousands of miles away were sweeter than any dessert the resort could have offered. Carter's text read like the script of a dark, chaotic comedy movie. Matthew, you will not believe the absolute nuclear meltdown that is happening right now at this country club. Where are you? You are missing the disaster of the century. I smirked, taking another sip of wine, and continued reading the barrage of texts Carter was sending in rapid succession. Apparently, Christian Vance did not take my sudden revelation lightly. The moment he left my parents' house that afternoon, he had his private legal team run an extensive, deep-dive background check on my father's manufacturing business. When Christian saw the horrific, bleeding financial statements and realized my father was entirely bankrupt and secretly planning to use the wedding to leverage a massive corporate bailout supply contract, Christian was absolutely furious. He realized he wasn't gaining a respectable business partner in Robert. He was gaining a desperate parasite. But it got so much worse. Christian also discovered the secret plot my parents had hatched to forcefully set me up with his older, divorced sister, Brenda. When Brenda caught wind of this through the family grapevine, she threw an epic, screaming fit. Brenda Vance was incredibly arrogant and deeply classist. The idea that a bankrupt, failing factory owner was trying to set her up with his ugly, fat IT guy son as a cheap bargaining chip completely insulted her massive ego. She screamed at Christian, demanding he cancel the entire wedding immediately. That was until Brenda's aggressively expensive divorce lawyer, who was apparently keeping tabs on financial movements, quietly informed her of my actual net worth and my new status as the majority owner of their company. Suddenly, Brenda realized she hadn't been set up with a loser. She had missed out on a massive billionaire catch who was now way out of her league. She was so furious at the missed opportunity that she got entirely blackout drunk at the rehearsal dinner and loudly accused my parents of ruining her life. Christian Vance, dealing with a screaming sister and the realization that his future son-in-law's family were deceitful gold diggers, pulled my father into a private room. According to Carter's highly reliable eavesdropping, Christian completely shredded my father. He formally revoked any possibility of a supply contract, effectively sealing the doom of my dad's factory. But Christian didn't stop there. He turned his terrifying wrath onto Elijah. Christian told Elijah that if he ever mistreated Sarah, or if he ever tried to use the Vance family name to secure loans or clout, Christian would ruthlessly invoke total custody of Sarah's massive future trust fund, locking Elijah out of a single dime of the Vance fortune forever. The wedding still happened, strictly to avoid a public high society scandal, but it was a miserable, suffocating, tense nightmare. Look at this picture, Carter texted, attaching a blurry photo of the altar. I clicked on the image. It was a shot of Elijah standing at the altar with Sarah. Elijah was wearing a wildly expensive, custom-tailored tuxedo, but he looked absolutely terrible. His face was pale and slick with nervous sweat. He wasn't smiling his signature golden boy smile. He looked like a hostage standing in front of a firing squad. He looked terrified. He knew that the Vance family despised him. He knew his father was entirely ruined, and he knew that his rich, powerful older brother had completely abandoned him to the wolves. My mother, sitting in the front pew in the photo, looked like she had aged 10 years in a single week. Her posture was completely slumped, her face buried in a tissue. It wasn't tears of joy for her son's wedding. It was the bitter, agonizing tears of a woman watching her entire fake, carefully constructed social empire burn to the ground in real time. I slowly locked my phone, setting it face down on the table. I looked back out at the vast, peaceful Pacific Ocean. I didn't feel the urge to gloat. I didn't feel the need to text Carter back and laugh about their misery. The fire of rage that had fueled my grueling workouts and my ruthless business acquisitions for an entire year had finally burned itself completely out. There were no embers left. They had received exactly what they deserved. The universe, guided by my firm hand, had delivered absolute karma. The toxic cycle was broken, and I was entirely free. I finished my delicious prime rib steak, paid the exorbitant bill, and walked down to the white sand beach to watch the sunset, breathing in the clean, salty air of my brand new life. When I finally returned to the bustling, loud city a week later, deeply tanned and completely recharged, I stepped into a brand new era of my life. I didn't just feel different. The very atmosphere around me had fundamentally changed. I walked into the massive glass lobby of my corporate building, and the security guards immediately stood a little straighter. I took the private elevator up to the executive penthouse suite. Joseph was waiting for me in my office, sitting on the edge of my massive oak desk, reviewing a thick stack of legal portfolios. "Look who finally decided to come back to reality," Joseph grinned, tossing a file onto the desk. "You look incredibly relaxed for a guy who just bought out half a corporate empire. How was the trip?" "It was exactly what I needed," I said, taking off my suit jacket and hanging it up. Total silence. No drama. "What's the status on the Vance subsidiary?" "Running smoothly," Joseph reported, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "Christian Vance's board is terrified of you, which is making integration incredibly easy. By the way, the board officially approved the internal restructuring plan. My promotion to Chief Operations Officer is finalized. The massive salary bump hits my accounts next Friday." "You earned every single penny of it, Joe?" I smiled, sitting down in my high-backed leather chair. "We built this from the ground up." My business continued to skyrocket. With the Vance acquisition securely under our belt, our firm's reputation in the financial district became legendary. We were the silent predators who moved massive capital without making a sound. My personal wealth grew to a level that I couldn't have comprehended when I was a terrified college student eating cheap ramen. But the money wasn't the prize anymore. The prize was the absolute, unshakable security it provided. Nobody could ever make me feel small again. Nobody could ever threaten my livelihood or demand I change my appearance to suit their toxic agenda. About 6 months after the disastrous wedding, I was walking out of a high-end coffee shop downtown, holding a black Americano. It was a crisp, bright autumn morning. As I walked down the busy sidewalk, adjusting the cuffs of my bespoke suit, I suddenly made brief, unexpected eye contact with a man wearing a bright neon orange vest, pushing a heavy utility cart full of cardboard boxes out of a delivery truck. It was Luke, the high school quarterback, the ringleader who had deliberately tripped me in the cafeteria while my brother laughed. He had gained a significant amount of weight. His hairline was rapidly receding, and he looked deeply exhausted, his face lined with the harsh stress of a grueling, low-paying labor job. He froze for a split second, his hands gripping the metal handle of the cart. I saw the sudden flash of recognition in his tired eyes. He recognized the sharp jawline, the blonde fade, the expensive clothes. He knew exactly who I was. For a brief moment, the loud city noise seemed to fade away. We just looked at each other. I didn't sneer at him. I didn't say a single word. I didn't need to try and humiliate him or rub my success in his face. His current reality was punishment enough. The realization that the giant loser he used to mercilessly torture was now walking out of a luxury high-rise while he pushed cardboard boxes in the freezing cold was a brutal, silent victory. Luke immediately looked away, his face flushing dark red with deep shame. He lowered his head, staring intently at the concrete sidewalk, and quickly pushed his heavy cart past me, desperate to disappear into the crowd. I took a slow sip of my hot coffee and kept walking toward my office. I didn't look back. I realized in that exact moment a profound, universal truth. Bullies peak in high school. The people who peak early rely on tearing others down to artificially elevate themselves. But the people who are constantly broken down, the people who are forced to rebuild themselves from absolute scratch, we build foundations made of solid steel. We don't peak. We continuously ascend. I had an incredible core group of people in my life now. I had Joseph, who respected my mind long before I lost the weight. I had Gabriel, who had taught me the immense, undeniable power of physical and mental discipline. I had a life that I had carefully, meticulously constructed with my own two hands. The deep, agonizing wounds of my childhood had finally closed. They left behind thick, noticeable scars, but the scars no longer hurt. They were simply a permanent, physical reminder of the brutal war I had fought and the glorious victory I had ultimately won. Looking back on that entire chaotic, painful journey, the most important lesson I learned wasn't about diet or exercise or how to execute a hostile corporate takeover. It was about fundamentally understanding my own intrinsic value. For 29 years, I allowed my toxic parents and my viciously insecure brother to dictate my absolute worth. I genuinely believed their terrible lies. I believed that because I was heavy, I was inherently lazy. I believed that because I wasn't the charming, athletic golden boy, I was fundamentally unlovable and unworthy of basic human respect. I let them trap me in a tiny, suffocating mental cage, and I quietly handed them the key. But the day I walked out of that dark patio, the day I realized they literally viewed me as nothing more than a disposable bargaining chip in a dirty business transaction, that was the day I finally woke up. I didn't lose 90 pounds of body fat for them. I didn't build a multi-million-dollar empire to impress them. I did it entirely for myself. I did it to brutally murder the weak, terrified victim they had actively created, and to give birth to the strong, uncompromising man I was always meant to be. Cutting off toxic family members is a deeply taboo subject in our society. People will constantly tell you, "But they are your parents. He is your only brother. Blood is thicker than water." Let me tell you a secret. That is absolute garbage. Toxicity is toxicity, regardless of whether it shares your DNA. If a stranger repeatedly insulted your appearance, stole your hard work, and tried to sell you off to pay their debts, you would call the police and get a restraining order. You wouldn't invite them to a fancy wedding lunch. Sharing a bloodline does not give anyone a free, unlimited pass to mentally and emotionally abuse you. I walked away from my family, and I never looked back. I never unblocked their numbers. I never checked to see if my father's factory actually went into foreclosure, though I suspect it did. I never checked to see if Elijah and Sarah's miserable marriage survived the crushing weight of Christian Vance's strict financial leash. I simply do not care. Their toxic drama is no longer my problem to solve. I protect my hard-earned peace with the absolute ferocity of a guard dog. You are not your traumatic past. You are not the cruel, careless labels that ignorant people forcefully slapped onto you when you were too young and weak to defend yourself. You have the absolute power to rewrite your entire story at any given moment. It requires a terrifying amount of pain, sweat, and discipline, but the freedom waiting on the other side of that mountain is worth every single agonizing step. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It's not easy to dig up these old, painful memories and share them with the world, but if my journey can help even one person realize their own strength, it was worth it. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope it reminded you that you don't have to accept the terrible hand you were dealt. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to make the agonizingly difficult decision to cut off toxic family members to finally save your own sanity? Please, share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and this community is an incredibly safe space. Now, for a special request. If you are hearing my voice right now, it means you stayed with me through the absolute darkest parts of my life and celebrated the victory at the end. You didn't click away. You are part of an elite group. So, if you made it to the very end of this video, I want you to go down to the comments and simply type the letter W. Just W. That stands for winner. That is our secret code to recognize the 1% Club, the resilient, amazing people who see things through to the very end and refuse to quit. Please hit that like button if the story moved you, and make sure you follow the channel. We have so many more incredible, real-life stories to share, and I want you to be here for every single one of them. Until next time, keep your head up, know your absolute worth, and never, ever let anyone make you feel small again.